What you learn through this documentary is the tip of the iceberg.
Most people are disconnected from each other. And I think there's even a spiritual aspect to it. The fact that we long to be connected to someone or something. And the way we design our homes, our cities today, we have become more and more disconnected. People love to be connected. They want to be where the energy is. They want it to be where the theaters and the food and the community, they want to connect to each other. There's sort of a deep down inside part of all of us.
My family was in the real estate business. My grandfather was a ditch digger for a utility company. And my other grandfather, he was a bootlegger at first. And then he went on to eventually ended up selling houses in subdivisions. And then my father, he was a salesman, eventually started building houses and started developing property, building apartments, building condos. And it's interesting, failing in second and third grade, just to digress for a second. The reason I failed it is my parents got divorced, which I didn't know till later in life when I saw my report card. It's the exact moment my parents divorced. So I went on from there and I ended up playing basketball and was very good in high school and ran track, and I ended up getting a scholarship to Northwestern University up in Chicago for a basketball scholarship. Started with this track scholarship, moved to basketball. And so when I got out of school from Northwestern, I jumped in my car, my Obito Chevy, and headed south to the land of opportunity to Texas. And when I showed up in Texas, I knew I wanted to be in the real estate business. I thought building houses, and I went to work for a company called Cambridge in Dallas. They put me in charge of two different subdivisions. One was about 1,200 acres and one was 600 acres. And the reason they put me in charge of those two projects is because the year before they didn't sell one home site. And so really I was in charge of cutting the grass. Then I sold a couple home sites, and then the market started moving. And within a year, I had developed 1,000 home sites. And so within 5 years, I'd probably developed 5,000 home sites. I'm just some young kid out of Northwestern. I always thought something was wrong, but I didn't really understand what was wrong.
But how we build houses is just ridiculous. Look at this. There's no functionality of anything you see here. It's how cheap can you build a house and how stupid can your house be. Now, why you love those houses in Italy or Europe or wherever you go? Because they're all made on the same product. And then you get to see the individual's personality come out of the house. And that's why I love it. Look at this. You want a little education for you in the back seat. Setbacks from the front, side yards. Look at this side yard right here. What purpose is that side yard? What are you gonna do? Play golf over there? Tennis? Kick a ball? Alright? There's no sense in this. See, there's no sense in this house.
More times than not, when a development occurs, the first thing that happens is the bulldozers come in, scrape the place clean, and then you start from scratch. So you've already cut down all of the trees, you've taken away all of the character of the property, and typically you've taken the drainage, so the water went from one side to the other, and put it in culverts underground.
We are taking land out of commission, land that could be there to clean our air, clean our water, and provide safe food for us. So when we do that, we have an enormous responsibility that if we don't take seriously, we will, I believe, lose the right to practice that. We're stewards, literally, of the environment. I think that term is very often overused, but I think we really are.
We would develop 200 home sites at a time. And but being creative back then was to put a gazebo or make all the sidewalks show up at the same place. I went from there to geographically diversify myself and went out on my own. I started building neighborhoods in Columbia, South Carolina, Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina, really all over the United States. Fast forward, this is the late 80s, and I was doing consulting work with a lot of Fortune 500 companies. So I was constantly on a plane from coast to coast, really understanding how cities grow. By that time, I had probably developed 15,000 home sites in America. During that period of time, I would go on these trips to the Amazon, back and forth to the Amazon. And the first trip when you go on the Amazon, you think you're the king, and because you're the rich American, you're down there in the jungle, and they need you.
This is Boyd Walker. He's on the Amor Beatriz down in the Amazon jungle, just south of Parachines, close to Mamaru. Give us the different examples and what you've seen in the Amazon.
I've been blessed to live there my 52 years, lived there off and on for 40 of them, and working specifically in the Amazon Valley with the normal, I guess you could call normal population of the Amazon Valley, which is river dwellers and lake dwellers in communities or individuals, and also with several of the Indian tribes that are truly the indigenous people of the valley. A community, regardless of whether it be an indigenous tribe or it be local dwellers of the lakes and rivers, usually begins with a patriarch and his family. It grows from there with people that are like-minded. They come and they like to lead. They're following a leader. They feel comfortable, they feel secure, they feel safe.
After my second, third, fourth, fifth, 10th trip down there, and eventually building a boat in the Amazon, I realized that they had it right, we had it wrong. Years later, the ambassador from Croatia to the United States was in the United States in Galveston, which I had a project down there. And I entertained him for a couple days, and he invited me back to Croatia.
We're about to leave this airport, Frankfurt, and head to Dubrovnik, Croatia, where the journey will begin. Well, I sat next to a very large woman. How large was she? Large enough that part of her skin matter was below and above the armrest with adipose tissue. And every time she coughed, it spewed all over my left arm. Give me my meal.
Do we need to test you for tuberculosis?
I don't know, man. That pissed me off. I'm telling you. That's the worst thing, coming over there when you see somebody sitting in your seat. Half your seat and all theirs. You know it's going to be a bad 10 hours.
I invested in some property in Croatia with another gentleman, and it came with a whole portfolio, and it was supposed to, I thought it was only a part of a hotel, but it ended up part of the village, and it was part of the village of this little seaside village called Supertar. So I remember once we had closed on the transaction that I went over into Supertar and was sitting in the harbor. And I'm sitting there, and one of the guys that works in one of the bars in this resort, it's a 1,500 room resort, and has all kinds of other assets that comes with it. And he came up to me, and we started talking, and in that conversation, he told me he was a lawyer, and I said, well, you're the bartender at the hotel? And he goes, yeah. and he was a tall Croatian guy, good-looking guy, about 28, well-spoken. I said, well, you're 28, you're a good-looking guy, and you're a lawyer, and you graduated top in your class. Why aren't you going to Paris or London to work? Why do you want to live right here in this village? Because this is where my family is. This is who we are. Why would I want to go somewhere else? I was so fascinated by that statement. But every day I would go down to the harbor and I would spend all day and I would take notes and pictures. And then I started categorizing the pictures. And I started trying to understand the movement of people up and down the streets and where they lived and what was their real purpose. And then I started going up and down the coastline, taking pictures and videos and really trying to understand why people loved living in their village. Why were they a community?
In a village-based community, everyone is more, they're close, they're bonded, they're more interconnected, where everyone has a specific role, a specific part to play in each other's lives. One thing I learned during my studies of the Amazonian people is that people who live in the village community, they actually thrive and flourish because of their well-established interrelationships they have with their people there and each other.
It's difficult to develop relationships with people that you don't see. It's difficult to develop relationships with people with whom you don't interact on a daily basis. It's difficult to develop relationships with people for whom your only perception of them is a stereotype. When you actually live, work, interact on a daily basis with people from a variety of socioeconomic levels, that's when you realize that the common values, the common beliefs, the common humanity that we share that binds us together, it's not segregated by who lives in an apartment complex, who lives in a multi-$100,000 home.
My background is developing 15,000 residential home sites, developing commercial properties, office parks, industrial parks, resorts, manufacturing in China, technology, all these things that I've done in my career, but just fascinating me. Now I get it. I get it. It's this little fishing village, like all the other villages, they evolved over time. And based on the evolution of how they evolved, everything had purpose. The people went to the centerpiece of this village to get information, to eat, to go to the market, to go to the bakery, but it all functioned as one. I hear it all the time. They go to this little village up in Tuscany and say, oh, I'd like to live there, but they don't know why they want to live there. That's what I was after. What is it about that person? What in that inner soul wants to live there?
It's a spirit that is comprised of all the buildings, all the people, not only the architecture, but all the nature, and that spirit is the culmination of all those factors put together. It creates an environment that is in harmony with one's spirit. It creates an environment that allows one to breathe, that allows one to grow, that allows one to thrive.
And once I learned that, I said, I want to come back to America and do it. So I came back to the United States, sold almost every project I had, and I said, I am going to build a village.
I think that takes a lot of guts to do what Jeff did, to be probably one of the most successful developers in the United States with over 15,000 developments that he had done, high-end, low-end, luxury, condominiums, townhomes, to say, I'm doing it wrong, and I want to stop doing what we're doing to do what's right. And I think that's really the heart of a visionary, just to be so impassioned with what he believes in, that he's willing to say, I'm going to give it all up to follow what I know is right. And that's what he's done. That's what he's done with this whole concept that he's introducing to the United States. It's a concept that when you fully understand it, it rings true inside you. When you finally get what he's trying to say, you will realize that's the way it should be. That's what we're missing.
I had to do it that way because our financial market doesn't understand what I just said. And for me to go to an institutional investor or the financial market and say, hey, I want to go spend $200 million or $300 million to do a project, they would just say, well, show me an example of it and then we'll finance it.
Here's our challenge with Wall Street. Underwriting real estate investment in America is based on, one, cash flow from use, rents. And are we then analyzing the rents for a particular use, or are we analyzing them for place? No. In America, we analyze them based on use. And the reason we do that is because we want to bundle those debt instruments to resell them in the secondary market. And so this is not a question of risk, it's a question of matching the appropriate underwriting tool with the appropriate risk profile. It's not that Wall Street is afraid of the risk profile, it's that they don't know how to assess it. Because the cash flows are more diversified when you're talking about place that equals multiple uses. That's the key. And your point, which is if you have multiple ownership and it's atomized, well, if this ownership and this business fails, it will be replaced by a different use. And that use, that new use, is going to be in a context of success, because even though this owner doesn't own this or this, we know from a design perspective what's going to be next to us, whether it's 10 years, 20 years, or 30 years. Great walkable neighborhoods. And so we don't care what the use is next to us. We just care that it's predictable in terms of the character. That's why downtowns maintain their value over time. Wall Street is not set up to assess that kind of risk. It's only set up to securitize cash flows based on use. That's the primary problem, is that your audience doesn't understand this piece. And it's our challenge to explain how use rents in a cash flow model that is underwriting risk actually can be translated into a place type where you have a diversification of different uses. I think it's that simple.
So I started on this journey on my own. And the first project that I did in America is a project called Adriatica, which is located in McKinney, Texas.
Currently, I'm the builder in Adriatica. Throughout my career, I've built both residential and commercial construction. It served me well as I came here to Adriatica. We're building retail, commercial, business construction in the truest sense of mixed use. About 4 or 5 years ago, my wife and I were traveling to Croatia. Traveling throughout the country of Croatia and through Split and Supetar, it truly caught my eye, and probably more so on that trip than any other trip. But just, I don't know, this case in particular, and specifically Supetar. We spent some time in Supetar and on the island of Brač and became really fascinated with it. So much so that on the flight home, my wife and I talked about, now, wouldn't it be fantastic if a village like Brač, Supetar, was built in America? Something that really captured what it is that we, as most people that travel over there, become enamored with and fall in love with.
Part of what makes Adriatica work and what's so appealing to it is the fact that it's so diverse in its design, and the fact that we're not building boxes that we're trying to fill up with tenants. We're bringing in tenants and letting them tell us what the boxes look like.
I have asked some of the greatest planners, city planners, urban planners of our time. And the question I ask them is real simple. If new urbanism is on a scale, let's say the scale is a 10, and let's say they're a 3 or whatever you want to call them, what is a 10? The 0 is somebody just building a house down the street. And then we have subdivisions. And then we have master planning communities. And then we have new urbanism. And I ask these guys, if that's a 0, what's this? This is a 10, what is this? What do we call this? And a 10 is a village. New urbanism in its finest, if you could build it perfect, is a village. So that's the scale. Let's call this 5. New urbanism's only probably gotten to a 3. The most you could ever be, the closest you probably could ever get to a village is probably a 7, because you'll never be able to figure out exactly the evolution of a village. Adriatica, or the new word NeoRetroism, is probably a 5, because it's the first one of its kind to actually build the evolution of a village. This scale, 0 to 10, and 10 being a village, what is a village? A village equals form plus function plus evolution over people. It could be anywhere in the world. But here's how generally a village is formed. You're in Croatia and you're on the coast.
I think the idea of villagers coming together for a commerce purpose is already into a certain evolution of the village. But if you look at our ages, if we just start out on a spectrum, we have the agrarian era, if you will. During that period, there were very few villages because everybody more or less took care of themselves. So these all started out fairly small. Like you said, you'd have an area where people would gather. Maybe this is the coastline here, this is an island, or just the edge of the mainland. It would start out very small, maybe just a small collection of individuals. As time went on and we became more industrial, that really started to hit its stride in about the 1890s. That's not all that long ago in the history of man. We're only talking about 120 or so years ago. From that point, let's say 1890s to about 1950, the U.S. was growing in basically small villages. There was only 100 million people in the United States in 1915. We were all small collections and small communities. We didn't have cars, largely, so if you had to go to work, you went by foot, or you went maybe by horse, or maybe you went by rail. So you could say that a lot of our urban form is defined by transportation, whether it's your own feet, or an animal with 4 feet, or a vehicle with 4 wheels. So the more technologically advanced our transportation became, the larger the footprint of our cities became. But something changed in 1950. And it was the returning GIs, it was the creation of the interstate highway system, it was the offering of low interest loans. All of a sudden you have this boom in generation. And from 1950 on through today, we've essentially been building the same way. In 1950, the average house size, I think, was 900 square feet. 2000, the average garage on a new house was 900 square feet. So now, not only is our urban form getting larger, but the buildings are getting larger, unnecessarily so. Most of this development has been for the storage and conveyance of cars and trucks. We've forgotten how to walk. So what happens in the last 2 to 3 years, say from 2009 to 2012, we start hearing about things like childhood obesity, shorter lifespan, quality of life going down. Why is this happening? If the best minds are developing urban forms that are supposed to meet the marketplace, why are things so bad? It's because we're not really doing what we should be doing. We're doing what developers have traditionally done because it's simple, it's understandable to them, and I think it's because the banks and the financial institutions are familiar with that form. The UN did a study that said more people lived in cities for the first time globally, all over the planet. More than 50% of the population was urbanized. So we've had a sort of this approach where we've gone like that, and then we're now doubling back. One very, very small example is green space. This is something that almost every new urbanist project either tends to forget or they put on the side. The church would be, freestanding, and then right next to it would be the graveyard. To emphasize the importance of green space, okay, so now it's not a cemetery, now it's a park. That green space linked directly to all of the development and made it a better place to be. So whether you could see it or walk to it, and a 5-minute walk is about a quarter-mile radius, that adds value and ownership to that neighborhood. That's what I think we have lost in our subdivisions. They're going to have parks, they have resident amenity centers, or whatever they're called. We're trying to create this linear equation of how humankind has developed over hundreds of years or thousands of years. It's a real challenge. We got to this point slowly, we got to this point slowly. We've actually done this a little more rapidly because of the nature of technology and development. But I think that it's also shown that there's a disconnect.
So I sat around with a guy whose name is J.D. Lee, and we were talking about this, and he says, you need to come up with a word. So he came up with this word called NeoRetroism.
What we're trying to accomplish in Adriatica with our NeoRetroism philosophy We know that we're not going to be able to recreate the Supertar village. We're never again going to have the same needs that they did hundreds, thousands of years ago that led to the birth and creation and development of these villages. But what we can do is we can capture the essence of what happens in those villages today, the way that people live today, the social interaction that comes from the integrated commercial, retail, residential, all those bodies living together, living consolidated in a true working village environment. There's such a social benefit that I think when we're in these villages, in these smaller European villages, there's that social component that I think we may not consciously walk away with realizing or knowing that was the experience we just had that filled us with this romance that I'm speaking of. But I think when you reflect back, that's certainly one of the key components. It's a much more intimate way of life in every sense of that word than we experience generally here.
NeoRetroism encompasses a village where people know one another, where people shop at the local bakeries, they eat at the local restaurants, they help one another, they garden, they do things together because they all know one another. It's a small village. It's a live village. It's one that will continue into the future. And hopefully, the children of the people that live there will continue to want to live in an environment like that, so that perhaps this idea will continue to spread across the country.
Adriatica is a model of a new term, NeoRetroism. It's about going back to the old world concept of the village. It's about community, it's about people, it's about ownership and investment in that community.
It is time that architects and planners and cities and council people and understand what a village truly is. What is your end game? What is your goal? What we have done in America and what I've learned that we have done all over the world is designed our cities around zoning, around categories to congregate all those people in areas. We are segregating our society. So we've taken all these apartment dwellers, we put them all together and we put them over here. And then people that are millionaires, we put them over this way, maybe put a gate around it. And people that have $250,000 to $300,000 houses, they're over here. And then the homeless shelter, it's over there. And the independent's over here. And then the churches, they have their 10 acres too. So we've designed our zoning in our cities to segregate us from ourselves based on income or based on product type.
One of the things that people are presented as something that is a goal to be achieved is this notion of, if I can surround myself with lots of people just like me, then I'll be happy. You see that a lot in the way that developments and neighborhoods are designed, in a sense, to be deliberately segregating. When you come up to a development and one of the first things that you see on the advertising sign is the price range of the homes, and you can instantly categorize the income levels of the individuals that be living in that particular development. I can certainly imagine and have had it happen that a person would drive by, look at those numbers and say, not so much to themselves, those homes are out of my price range, but that group of people is not who I feel I can fit with, or sometimes in the reverse.
We don't connect anymore. Okay? And we have to learn to connect. We have built walls around ourselves. I use this analogy. If I had the ability to build 3 walls and you had the ability to build 3 walls, okay, like right here, and I built a wall on my side and behind me, and you built a wall the same way, you and I would interconnect. But if we had the same ability to build those same walls, and I built a wall in front of me and you built yours in front, you built yours on the sides, we would never talk to each other. And I know that's very simple what I just explained, but that is how we're designing our neighborhoods.
My experience predominantly has been, whether it was residential construction or commercial construction, I would have a lot or a plat of land, and I would plan a single use, or maybe it would be multiple uses, but it would be individually segregated into lots, and there was not the need to really think beyond any one individual structure. In Adriatica, there's the need to consider every structure. How are they going to work? We're going to have residential above a commercial component. They have different parking needs, they have different utility needs, they have different common area needs. So it went beyond even the construction complexity, and the construction complexity in itself is something that was enough of a challenge.
Being involved in a project like this definitely makes you question what's going on around us, how we've been developing things, and how we could have been doing things better all along. The projects here in Adriatic are so diverse, it makes it exciting to come to work every day. I'm not sure if I'm going to work on a chapel or a boat.
Once we developed a certain level of buy-in with the theoretical concept, what we really did not foresee until some of these projects were built and on the ground was the cultural component of what would change. We've certainly learned to embrace the concept of commingling uses and building something that's going to last much, much longer. But at the time, there was a certain challenge in generating buy-in from the community. Various residents and stakeholders around the community had a great deal of concern with what this project was. It was so unique and so far out of the bounds of anything we had ever seen here before, and really anything that the nation has seen before.
This is a work in progress. You know, everybody says, what's going on with the rest of the property? The hard thing about building a village, you don't build a village in one day. Who in the zoning that was approved the other day on this is the most unusual zoning I've ever seen in the state of Texas. To be able to zero a house on the front, back, sides doesn't exist. Okay? I'm in the business of trying to change how developers develop property in the United States and teach them, not like I'm really going to teach them, but show them that we can do these kind of things. It's possible.
Generally, as people bring innovative new ideas, they certainly run into a certain amount of resistance out of the gate, and we certainly saw that with this project. So working with Jeff and getting him through the planning and zoning process and getting the buy-in from the elected officials was certainly a challenge. In doing so, I think most of the elected officials will tell you today this is certainly one of the key focal point projects in the city of McKinney, and really sets us apart from the adjacent communities, as no one else has anything like this project.
Here's what we believe in the United States. If I gave you $1 million, you could walk down and buy a piece of property and build a subdivision or an apartment complex or whatever you wanted to build. But they don't give the same right to a guy. If you gave me $1 million, they wouldn't let me walk in the hospital and do brain surgery on you. So our qualifications in America are very simple. If you have the money, then you can go develop.
Since the age of 12, I had been trained as a classical violinist. When I was in college, I was the concert master of our orchestra, and I had the brief opportunity of playing with the Irving Symphony. What many people don't know about the violin is it takes hours and hours and hours to produce a great tone. In fact, it takes about 1 to 2 years before you can practice in front of people to where they can actually stand to hear you practice. The same thing happens when a developer tries to develop a community. If you gave them a bunch of money and gave them the violin without any training or experience, what they're going to produce is cat scratch music. It takes truly experience, it takes dedication, it takes hard work for that development to become a beautiful symphony of music that only comes from experience, hard work, and training.
The point is, as a city council person or a zoning commission member or a neighborhood group, you need to study the people who are developing your neighborhood. You're the one that's going to give them a certificate to say, yes, you can go develop my neighborhood. What experiences do you have? We want to teach the world how, first of all, what we're doing wrong. And if nothing else you get out of this, I mean, get in your car and drive and you'll see exactly what I'm saying about segregating our neighborhoods. You'll see what's wrong, you'll get it. And then the next question is, how can you improve it?
This is what we become right here. Our schools, look at here. Here's a high school. It's not even used all summer long. We don't know how to multi-purpose our facilities. Get me fired up. I'm pissed off about what you have. It's a whole new way of thinking how to make. And is it environmental? Is it environmental? Am I environmentalist? No. But this is the king of saving the environment. Just makes me pissed off how we develop property here. God, we're a bunch of idiots. And that's why I ended my career. Because of this.
Start to put the things back in the same place again that created communities in the first place. I.e., you work, you live, and you play in the same place.
There's a study done in Pennsylvania about a people group. I think it's the Rosetto. It's in Malcolm Gladwell's book. Very fascinating, about a little village in Pennsylvania that were Italians. They came here and they have less heart disease. They have 30% less heart disease, less cancer. It all comes down to their village, and they're interdependent on each other. And they live longer. And that's what the true village will do for people. Sure, it's beautiful, but that interaction and that need for us two to belong is so powerful.
Most people are disconnected from each other. And I think there's even a spiritual aspect to it. The fact that we long to be connected to someone or something. And the way we design our homes, our cities today, we have become more and more disconnected. And so that's why the surge in new urbanism and the traditional neighborhoods is to try to reconnect to each other. I think the things that are happening in the economy have forced us to go in that direction because of the cost of gas and other things. But people want to, you see these new communities that are rising up. People love to be connected. They want to be where the energy is. They want to be where the theaters and the food and the community, they want to connect to each other. There's a sort of a deep down inside part of all of us that wants to be connected to somebody or something.
I mean, I will tell you, you will live longer living in a real village. You can eat the exact same foods as the subdivision next door, but you will live longer because I will care about you and you will care about me. And we will have interaction all the time. And I'll watch out after your kids. If I know John's kids are running through there, I will keep an eye on it. But if I don't know John, how can I care about his kids? So safety is unbelievable. I have won the highest award in America for the environment. I've donated islands for the environment. You would think I'm an environmentalist. I'm not. I just build for purpose. And if we all built for purpose, we become environmentalists.
And it's an inherent proclivity by humans to want to be in touch with nature. You want a window. You want to be able to see outside. You want to be able to breathe the fresh air.
What I saw when I went to Brazil is everything had a plan, had a purpose. Walking in through the Amazon, nothing is out of place. Nothing is just thrown together haphazardly. They think about everything. They plan everything. There's no misuse of materials, and there's no wasted materials. Everything has a purpose.
Architects and engineers and builders are responsible for the use and misuse of significant amounts of resources, almost more than any other industry. If you consider all that we use to build, ship, design, process, all the components that go into our projects, we are responsible for a lot.
The architects and the designers and developers are still trying to make, to me, are trying to put their signature on each building. In a village, they didn't do that. They did it out of necessity. I mean, you try to do architecture that's pleasing and acceptable to our eye, but it's not out of, I'm going to make a name for myself. It's out of the true aspect of form follows function. You know, it's how people live, how you want to live today, to recapture that village, that sense of village, and to do that, you can't go out there and I'm going to do my architecture this way.
If we can educate developers and architects, we can incorporate these things in our plans, in our village.
There's been baby steps as we go from just straight suburbia to something that's a little bit more of a mix of the residential and the retail components, to something that's a little bit more, adds in some of the play varieties. That has become new urbanism. The next step from the new urbanism concept of development is NeoRetroism. This is probably the best around in that it was so controlled, if you will, by the owners of what they wanted this property to look like. There are a lot of new urbanist developments. A lot of them are done on that previous explanation or example I used about come in, scrape it clean. This one, because of the environment that was so important to the owners, made it better than a lot of the other examples that have been developed over the last 10, 15, 20 years. You know, this is just another one of the stepping stones to get from where we were, classic suburbia, to where many people want to go, back to the concept of a true village.
A village really is the need of a people group, typically a walking distance to come and go away in a day. But remember, a village, every village is different.
When I first heard of the term NeoRetroism, it brought me back to my studies in biology, where we were studying about the growth and the formation and the development of the human body, starting from the very cell, how 2 cells will start joining together, then 3 cells. It's very much like the village concept in my perspective. When a human body is developing, you always start with something very small, a single cell, which could be an individual, a single house being built in a community. And then that grows to several more houses being built, and several more houses being built, and apartment complexes going up, condos. The way that you have an entire community living together, that is like the formation of an organ. When all the cells come together, it becomes complete and it can function. But without everything else, without the retail stores, without the banks, without the restaurants, it's not a full community yet. It's just a group of people living. So it hasn't reached its full potential. So go back to biology and add in another organ, and add in another organ. Bring in your retail, bring in your banks, bring in your restaurants, bring in your recreation, bring in your town center. All that together is like the formation of the human body when you start incorporating different organs into different organ systems, and then you enclose it within the walls, and you have a full functioning, self-sustaining system, and it's amazing. Everything can function by itself, and each one has a very specific purpose. The retail stores, the recreation, the housing, everything has a specific function, but when you put it together, it's a complete, fully functioning, self-sustaining system that thrives without outside influence.
When people come to Adriatica, which is the first NeoRetroism project in the world, but when they come here, they say, well, golly, it's very nice. Look at, it's too expensive to build. Back to that environmental question, use natural products. Use stone from the area, stone that's a driving distance within a couple hours. That's what Adriatic is. But use natural materials. When we first started this project, we had to learn about materials. because we knew that we had to be at market rent, market prices, from the project right across the street. And what we learned is that we can build this project for the same cost of a brick structure right across the street. So we can charge market rent for any building that we build inside of Adriatica. I promise you, your eye knows the difference between real and fake. We have perfected fake, and fake costs more than real.
The big part of the formula in making a village work is coupled with thorough design, is being able to make the construction and the process affordable.
Is it profitable? Well, the answer is absolutely yes. That same scale that I talked about before, where 0 is that guy building that house out in the farmland and 10 being a real village, is the same scale of risk factors from the financial market that there is. So the closer you get to a village, the less risk there is, because a real village virtually has 0 risk. New urbanism is a 3 or 3 1/4 or 3 1/2, and NeoRetroism is a 5, 6, 7. Obviously, there's less risk. You say, well, why is that? It's real simple. A real village is nothing more than a bunch of ownership of different people. The baker owns his own building, his own little shop. The flats, but we call them apartments, are owned by individual people. The chapel is owned by the church group or by the people of the village. So you go through it all the thing. So everything has to fail in a village for the village to fail. So you say, well, where's there profitability for an investor to invest? Well, you build a house and you can sell houses, just like you would anywhere else. You can build flats and you can sell them. You can sell your retail, you can sell them. And in some cases, I can see, like what we're doing at Adriatica here, but we're going to build some apartments inside the village, and we're going to build some independent living. And those may be owned by outside investors. But wouldn't you love to own a couple hundred rental units inside a village that's owned by the people of the village? Absolutely.
Wall Street hasn't figured out how to fund them properly because Wall Street is still stuck on this model, which is we sell the cash flows, we underwrite the cash flows of a particular use. And if we're not cash flowing by the 2nd or 3rd year, we're in trouble. We hope to peak out on our cash flows in year 5 or 6, and then everybody sells it off. We sell off the debt instruments, we sell off the properties, and we don't care what happens to the cash flow after that. So we design and entitle a conventional subdivision to not last longer than half a generation. And so that is actually very risky, because if these cash flows don't peak in the right time, our underwriting is off and we end up with the real estate-based recession we're in today. This graph is the reason we're in the recession. However, Adriatica is on a different curve, which is more like a downtown. And that is that this curve, the second curve, is based on the concept of adjacency predictability. What you've done is set up a model where you have the original owner, you, Blackard Global, is setting up the ability to atomize the ownership within the design context, the design, the form of the neighborhood, like a downtown. We're not creating buildings to be particular uses. We're not doing a building to be a 7-Eleven, which can only be a 7-Eleven, or a building to only be a Walmart, which can't be reinvented. You're creating an environment where buildings will reinvent themselves as the market evolves and as different community market segments come and go. Young people, older people, retirees. So your market segment is something that is evolving, whereas the market segment over here, if you get it wrong, you're dead in the water.
If you had a choice from across the street in another apartment complex or live in the village in an apartment that every building's different, where are you going to live? We had this mentality, okay, go to college, move into an apartment, save a few dollars, buy a car, then we move into a $100,000 house or $125,000 house, and there's just a momentum. We think in America that you just keep on moving all the way up. You move from one neighborhood to the next neighborhood, to the next segregated neighborhood, to the next segregated neighborhood, okay? And then when you get all the way to the top, then you start moving back down because you don't want the yard. Okay, it's just kind of funny how we do the cycle. We're one of the few groups in the world that does that. Okay, you graduate from college, go live with your parents till you get married. Well, that's ingenious. Save some money so you can buy the first and last house the first time.
One of the things I realized and I learned as I was wandering through the streets of Rome is that this is a city that has been here for so many, many years, so many, many generations of people, so much history that has enriched that city. And it made me wonder what was that ingredient that allowed it to be sustained all these years. And it was precisely the fact that the growth was organic, that these generations, that there's a reason why things are where they are, because they met the needs of the city. And everything is positioned to meet the needs of the village. Everything is positioned and designed so that someone could be born here, could grow up here, could grow old here, could even die here. And the whole spectrum of a person's life can be encompassed in this village.
And Adriatica represents the past, not necessarily the American past, but more of the European overseas past, because we see the model of those villages there where people grew up in the villages. They stayed there. They were dependent upon one another. They were self-sufficient within a village. So everyone had their place. You know, families would grow up and they'd build a house attached to their parents' house and so on and so forth. So Adriatica represents the past, but it is, I believe, more something that resonates within the soul to say this feels right. It feels right to not have such a large place to take care of if I don't need it, and to actually be able to walk around and enjoy the vineyard, enjoy the shopping, enjoy the people out playing with their children, or walking their dogs, or riding their bicycles, or fishing in the lake. It's a place that people can live and raise their families and retire here. And it's low maintenance, so people can actually live here but travel without having to worry about what's going on back home. Come back and someone's already mowed your lawn and taken care of everything. So I believe it's an absolute model for the future where people can enjoy their lives more and not be burdened down by the acquisitions of life as much.
I tell a lot of people this. Here's what's going on. If I had 100 acres of property, I'm going to go give it to my architect or my engineer, and they're going to see what they can do with the property. They're going to say, well, you can get 182 lots, or you can get 400 multifamily units, or you can do this. Let me tell you, that's not the way it's supposed to be. I know you're going to say, surprise, but the developer is the one that should know where he's going. The architect is the pencil to draw what he has up here on a piece of paper. The engineer is supposed to do the same. The lawyer is supposed to put his ideas in writing. He's supposed to interpret the law. We don't do that anymore. We think the architect is the lead. We think the engineer is the lead. Lead where you want to go. You have to have the direction, or don't do it. You know, that village that we were talking about and how it's evolving. So back when it's just a few of us, right? The first thing we're going to do is build a place of worship. The most important part after survival in a village is where do we worship? The bell tower would be the next thing you would build once you start growing. Why? Because you want to communicate with your neighborhood. You have to decide day one, what are you going to become as a village? What are you going to become? What are you? Are you a 400-year-old fishing village from Croatia? Or are you a 100-year-old fishing village in the Amazon? That's why the developer has so much responsibility. Decide what you are and stay true to that all the way to the end. It's interesting, if all I give you is a certain lot size, home site size, you will build inside that and make it very efficient. And that's exactly what has happened. We try every moment to look at history and what it can teach us before we make our first move. We believe in America that I can design a house in about 2 days or a week, okay? Well, some guy that's not even been here just gets a site plan. Wrong. NeoRetroism, the way I want you to think differently, take as much time in design as you do to build. Take as much time to walk where you're going to build your house, your home, that you're going to live there the rest of your life. Make that your first thing. I'm going to live there the rest of my life, and this is my home site, and I'm going to think of everything that I need. And I'm going to think that, golly, I'd sure like to open my windows during certain times of the year, so design windows that can open in the direction that the breeze will be coming through during that time. And I'll know where the sun comes, where I need to put shutters up. One thing after another, you need to learn about your home site. Take your time and learn about it. Wow, Sherlock Holmes. Can you imagine if you really learned that? You could shut off your heat and air for 4 or 5 months out of the year. How many times does the temperature drop and my air conditioner is still rolling? We need to learn about our houses when we design them. That's all I'm saying. New technology, great. We'll incorporate all those things in, from flat screen TVs in every room. That's all fine. But design your house that you can really live in and function in. Be a student of history and learn what form, function, and what evolution, what history has taught you on how you design your specific home site. So the way I want to finish my career on this earth is to do something that's right. A village is just your needs. And when your little village got to be, let's say, 1,000 people, then the village would say, we need another baker. And then you'd get another baker. And both bakers would be successful. That is a village. In this particular case, it's probably 1,000, 2,000 people. But when you come there, I know your name. If your car's broke down, I'm going to stop and help you. If your kids are running over there and some weirdo's walking up and talking to them, I'm going to be saying, what's going on? So we're going to self-protect ourselves. If I walk along there and I see some trash, I'm going to pick it up because it's my village, I own it. And even though that's my restaurant, that's my everything, even though I may not own it, you're on my territory. This is my village. That is a village. There is so much to learn about what a real village is. And a developer, we use that word in America, a developer needs to be so highly educated in order to get the rights to develop your neighborhood that not only you, but generations and generations and generations are going to live there. So if that guy's putting up walls around how you communicate with your neighbors, that guy has such power to destroy the fabric of our country and how we interact.
Another aspect of village life is the community that it strengthens with the interpersonal relationships that are developed from living in such a structured and organized plan.
Facebook, other social media, they're excellent for what they can provide. There's no substitute, though, for actually being able to come out of the place where you live, see a neighbor face to face, see a colleague at the coffee shop, and to actually be there with that person right there.
It's not the architecture that draws you in. It's the way the buildings are laid out and the way that the environment is set up that allows for people to interact the way that they do. It's a place where you can work, live, eat, play, all in the same place.
What we're talking about here is not a subdivision. It isn't a master plan community. It's a village. It's a village where people know people, where they visit one another, where they are neighbors, where families bond and stay together. And hopefully this will help change the way the world is operating today.
When you create a village, there's very little chance that a community, true village, small city, whatever you want to call them, is going to disappear. You hardly ever see that. Once in a blue moon you may read in Yahoo that there's a ghost town that's gone away. Cities only go away if the railroad pulled up stakes, the manufacturing plant pulled up stakes, the steel mills moved away. And even then, the community doesn't necessarily disappear, but it's impacted greatly, but it still survives. Most of the time, it's going to survive, and that's because of the environment that is there. It's people, it's the village, it's the community.
You cannot aspire to a sustainable planet if you still have people that cannot even get clean water. If you don't have the health, you're not going to have a community working toward the betterment of the whole, which I think ties into a village concept. If you don't know your neighbors and you haven't declared yourself native, you're only worried about yourself. You're gated in your community. You're safe. That's what matters.
I know that it took me a little while to understand it, but once I did, that's how I wanted to live. That's how I wanted my family to live. That's how I wanted to live. I realized how badly we've missed it. The sense of belonging, the sense of community, being able to be connected together, which is how we were meant to be. It's how it's been for thousands of years in villages and smaller areas where people knew each other and interacted together, and it all fed together organically. How different that is for us to be behind the gates, where you drive to go get some toothpaste at a corner store, and you drive back behind your gated community, and you never know who your neighbors are. The sense of disassociation that happens, the sense of we don't really care where we live. Let's just move. Let's go find another house. So that, when I fully understood it, I realized that's the way we should be living.
I really think that we're on to something. Jeff has had a tremendous idea, a tremendous vision, and I think this whole idea of NeoRetroism is the answer for the future development of not just the United States and communities within the United States, but all over the world.
You know, Jeff's goal and vision was really not to create something new at all. He wasn't trying to be an entrepreneur in the development sense. What he was really trying to do is he wanted to go back and bring something that had been lost, that was now extinct, certainly in our country, that he had seen so vividly and so many times in other parts of the world, where there was just based on the mechanics of those villages, a far greater sense of family, a far greater sense of neighbors, a greater sense of just intimacy within the environment that you lived in. He wanted to bring that back. It wasn't that Jeff wanted to create something different. He wanted to bring back something that had been lost, really the lost art of living and living well.
I am the worst segregator in our society. As an individual, I've built 15,000 residential home sites. That's miles and miles and miles of pavement without taking the time in really understanding the topography or how people will interact in the future. I have left it up to an architect or a junior architect or a junior engineer, civil engineer to lay out streets and lay out houses. It's sad, but knowing it's wrong is the beginning to know how to do it right. And if you can see that it's wrong, then at least we can start making the step forward on doing it right. It's a whole new way of thinking for us in America in the last 100 years.